Hi, I'm James from Chaosium. I sat down with Jay and we talked about the craft of game illustration and how it fits in the broader art world, specifically how it compares and contrasts with fine art. I'm going to jump across that interview in a moment, but first, subscribe to our YouTube channel. It helps us out and it lets us make more content like this. Thanks.
So in the larger art world, I feel that game illustration it's not a competition between the two. So there is game illustration and there's fine art, and people are always saying, well, that's not real art, or illustration isn't art. And actually this is an age-old argument. This doesn't just pertain to the game illustration argument. This goes all the way back to illustration in bygone days. That's not really art, that's just illustration, that's not fine art. And yet people take these old posters like Le Chat Noir, anything by Alphonse Mucha, and they hang it up on their wall in a big, beautiful frame, and look, suddenly it's art. It's fine art. There is a real knack to illustrating something to be so beautiful that you want to put it on your wall, but to also tell this story of this game that you're involved in and reflect that world. And those things are not mutually exclusive. I've learned more from just studying old masters' paintings about how the layout is going, how the eye is drawn, where your horizon lines should be. It's so much stuff that shouldn't be discounted just because it doesn't pertain to gaming. I will go to art galleries and just come up with tons of ideas and learn about how different artists put those sort of base concepts together. And it really does help when you're creating something like a cover or a really illustrative sort of worldview of one of the games that you're playing.
When I was first learning about art, I didn't really understand the different kinds of specializations that artists had. And I think I sort of thought that anyone could kind of do anything. Do games illustrators tend to have a pretty wide skill set and be able to approach all kinds of different projects? Or is there a pretty big specialization into games illustration itself?
So you can break it down by people who do game illustration and people who do non-game illustration and people who do fine art. Absolutely. However, I find that most people who do game illustration, once they are practiced, are so busy, they do not have time to do art for themselves anymore, which is a real shame, actually. Um, I hope and encourage people to be able to take a little bit of time here and there to just do something that they love. We have a couple of artists that work on RuneQuest who are professional high-end illustrators. They do very technical illustrations for big companies and they work for ad agencies and such. But their hobby is, I love RuneQuest. I want to draw guys in a fight. I want to draw, I want to draw these people doing magic. I want to work in this Iron Age style world and help build that. And that's such a joy to find that. But not everyone has that opportunity. Not everyone is working at an ad agency, right? It's really important to play. That's all I would have to say. If you do not give yourself time to play, your ideas are going to become stagnant and you won't realize that.
I've seen a few documentaries and I've heard a lot about how the fine art world works a little strangely internally from a professional and business perspective. And it sounds like illustration has a very, or at least relatively structured and well-maintained professional sphere. Do you think that the differences between illustration and fine art is primarily just the business and profession that surrounds it, or is there a creative quality and a creative difference as well?
I do not feel like there's a creative difference, except oftentimes the rate at which someone works as a game illustrator is mind-spinningly fast compared to what you might do as someone who is in fine art. I mean, it's like, okay, animators. Animators back even in the 70s and before, hand drew everything. They were literally drawing hundreds of pictures a day. And imagine that you are drawing hundreds of frames a day. That's crazy. And a game art illustrator for a TTRPG, while they do a lot of work, they can't draw hundreds of pictures a day. So that's mind-spinningly fast compared to that. And then if you go even a step further and say fine artists tend to have more time to get their work done because they work in shows in a series, almost like a band with an album. Albums are kind of becoming a thing of the past, but I really believe in them because an artist has a statement to make and a story to tell. And that's the same thing when a fine artist has a showing. They'll have, I don't know how many, but 7 to 15 pieces, and they will have had a year to work on those or 6 months to work on those. So I'm not sure I answered your question.
I think you got pretty close. I think that even just hearing about the differences between fine art and illustration is interesting in general. Let me ask a similar but slightly different question.
Yeah.
What is different between games illustration and other forms of illustration from a professional and creative view?
So games illustration is basically, in games illustration, you're building a world. Usually an entire world that has a mythology, it has a belief system, it has people, it has this vast opportunity to create something that will last throughout that game's life. Other types of illustration, while you do have a style guide and things that you have to follow, these are more conceptual. Like we only use pink and red and blue in our advertising or whatever it is you're illustrating. That's a completely different type of thing. I think game illustration is a lot more like illustrating for a children's book, to be honest. Because in a children's book, you're creating a whole world and a mythology. And you'll think about, even the drawings as simple as the comic book Bone. If anybody remembers Bone, that this is an epic story. And it has a world that you have to follow all the rules and make sure that all the trees look correct. And the character always has whatever, a specific shape of nose or whatever that is. All of those things matter to the building of the world. And in other kinds of illustration, sometimes they're even just one-offs that you're building for a company or you're building for whatever brand that you're working for.
So I think what we've talked about really illuminates a lot of the different kinds of art and a lot of the differences between game illustration and other types of fine art and other kinds of illustration. Is there any final points you want to make? Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to mention?
I feel like I'm so passionate about this topic that if I'm not careful, I'm going to just talk us to death. But I just think that you should surround yourself with things that inspire you. I'm this silly little glass crow, right? I love glass. I love to see the way light plays through glass, and it plays into so much of I do artwork as well, and it plays into so much of the artwork that I do and the things that I create. And the other thing I would say is give yourself personal representation in your life. That is, study cultures, look at art that other types of people do, indigenous folks, or like myself, I'm Romani. So we have a whole different style of artwork that's sort of signature to the culture, and expose yourself to a lot of that as much as you can, even if it's online. Print things out. I know that's old school. Put them on your wall, make mood boards. Mood boards are really important. You can do that by studying all these different kinds of art and cultures.